Today's show is sponsored by Megaport. Are you looking for an easier way to connect all your clouds that you're using? With Megaport's Network as a Service platform, you can spin up private connectivity to as many clouds as you want, anywhere in the world in minutes, not months. All the world's top cloud service providers, such as AWS, Azure, Google, are already on the network and at your fingertips. And it's all software defined, no hardware necessary. Just point, click, and connect. So if you're looking for a way to improve network performance and security, lower cloud cost, and turn up hybrid cloud and multi-cloud connections quickly and easily, Megaport is the cloud connectivity solution for you. Learn more at megaport.com. That's megaport.com. Reimagine connectivity.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Just Aaron this week for the news as we're heading into the holidays. Just a few shows left for the year. We have a couple Sunday perspectives coming up as well as our end of year roundup. So be on the lookout for that very soon. In news this week, we have a couple interesting things. A good friend of the show, HashiCorp, first of all. They raised $1.2 billion in an IPO this week. And as we've mentioned before, and if you've been a longtime listener, really, really good friend of the show, certainly wish great things for them going forward. And it's awesome to see this milestone in their journey, and certainly can't wait to see what's next for them. And next up, a fundraising round as well. CloudBees, another friend of the show, secured $150 million in Series F, and they did announce a valuation of $1 billion. Now, I have been joking here recently, who isn't worth $1 billion these days? But I do have to say, CloudBees, fantastic company. It's been great to see their journey over the years, and it's really good to see them continuing to really make this strive and this push forward as well. And next up is actually the AWS outage. And AWS outage, as many are aware, in the US East 1 region last week. And the postmortem is out. Now, I love to read these postmortems. It's so fascinating to me for a number of different reasons. I do love the transparency. I do love them talking about some of the inner workings. I know I've done at least one of these in the past, and it's very interesting to see how everything functions at scale, how automated everything is, but also too, there's, some still bugs to work out of the systems here and there. And the link to this will be in the Cloud News of the Week, but long story short, there's an internal network, there's an external network. They had some bursting and some automation happen, and it kind of got out of control. And some services, there was some trouble communicating, and from there it led to overall service interruptions. Again, if you're like to follow these, fascinating read as well. And for our last news article this week, O'Reilly put out their Cloud in 2021 study. And this follows on from the 2020 study. And what is really interesting here is how much data is here, and really good, I'll say, implementer and practitioner level data. Questions such as, who is out there? What verticals are they in? Where are they at in their cloud journey? And who are they looking to use? So I'll give you just a few of the stats. And again, if you want to dig deeper, the link is in the show notes. First of all, the year over year, who's going on this journey is up just a tad, but it's still the vast majority. It went up from 88% to 90%. And so there's very few left that aren't considering cloud in some way, shape, or form. Also, probably no big surprise, AWS leads, Azure is in second, GCP is in third. They're still the big three. And most respondents are using multiple cloud providers. Now, it doesn't go into detail of exactly how. And again, if you go back to the Sunday Perspective show from this last week and also tying it into the AWS outage as well, that whole concept of multi-region and multi-cloud and the complexity it can add and the cost it can add as well, very much something to consider. But most folks are at least dipping their toe in the water and maybe using different clouds for different things, which also goes into another stat as well, which is the biggest concerns. The biggest concerns are cost. Cost comes in at 30% of respondents say this is their biggest concern. And then when it comes to people, and I know we've talked about this before, and we'll probably talk about this more in the end of year wrap-up show as well, is this idea of where are the gaps? Where are the skills needed out there? And right now it is cloud security. Cloud security, just figuring out all of the moving pieces, where they all interconnect, how they all interconnect, and where that impact happens. 59% of respondents said that is the biggest need that is out there. And that is something we're seeing over and over again as well. And that's also something that really leads us into our main segment today. And coming up right after the break is Gil Hoffer, co-founder and CTO at Salto.io, and to talk about some of exactly this. What are some of the challenges of managing an integration of SaaS applications and this blurring lines that we're especially seeing in engineering? And so for that, I'm going to wrap up Cloud News of the Week, and we're going to have Gil right after the break.
Today's show is brought to you by CBT Nuggets. You know how much we value ongoing education on the Cloudcast. And CBT Nuggets is exactly what Aaron and I wish we had when we were trying to get our certification early in our careers. CBT Nuggets is all about bringing a personalized touch to learning about cloud computing, virtualization, networking, DevOps, and much, much more. Whether it's their hands-on labs with personalized coaching or the online chat functions that come up with every instructor-led course, CBT Nuggets' team of experts is always there to help you get the most from your training and your path to certification. You can check it all out at cbtnuggets.com/cloudcast and sign up for a free trial. You get access to the full catalog of great training, including virtual labs, quizzes, and other premium features completely free for the first 7 days. That's cbtnuggets.com/cloudcast. And we're back. And Aaron, we're going to talk a little bit about a space that you and I have talked about on and off, but different angles about it. We're going to talk a little bit about SaaS. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of this enablement of what we've talked about as sort of like a business engineer, kind of low-code engineer, the analyst that has to get work done, but in order to do it, they need some technology. This is a space I know you've dug into a lot, Aaron, kind of around what's going on with SaaS. How do we make better use of it?
Yeah, and it's been really interesting to really kind of triangulate, if you will, a bunch of the trends and talk about them today. So really looking forward to it.
Yeah. So, as we always try and do, we go find some folks that are experts in this space and find, some interesting angles that we think folks are going to be interested in. So very excited today to have Gil Hoffer, who is co-founder and CTO of Salto. Gil, welcome to the show. Great to have you on today.
Thank you, Brian, Aaron. Great to be here.
You have a pretty broad background in both engineering and creating technology, but also as an entrepreneur, starting companies, starting groups. We've talked to some of the companies that you've been in the past, but for folks maybe who either don't know Salto or may not be aware of you, give us a little bit of your background. Kind of what where have you gone, and what really drove you to start Salto? What were sort of the ideas that drove what you're doing today?
Yeah, sure thing. Gladly. So Salto, we're a startup company. We started the company about 3 years ago with 3 co-founders. I'm the CTO, and my co-founders are Rami Tamir and Benny Schneider, the CEO and president. And the interesting thing is that the 3 of us were actually in the exact same roles in a previous company, which was a company called Ravello Systems.
Yeah.
In a completely different domain. We're a virtual cloud provider, basically, running on top of AWS and GCP, and allowing our customers to bring their on-prem workloads, mostly from VMware, to the public cloud. So it was a SaaS company that we started around 2011, then it grew, and as the business grew, we got acquired by Oracle in 2016. And the interesting thing which led us to Salto in Ravella was, well, first of all, we were a SaaS company using all the usual SaaS specs in terms of our back office stack, your Salesforce, your Zendesk, your Marketo, all of those. And we were also deeply involved with everything that happened around DevOps and infrastructure as code. And the connection of these two trends basically led us to what we did in Salto. Because what we saw in Ravella back then is that while our engineering and product and marketing were all state of the art, meaning we practiced continuous delivery and everything was very well measured and everything was very well engineered, the way that we manage our business application stack, it was awful. It was the weakest link in the company. It was like a hot potato that we kept on bouncing between different departments because it's not really engineering, it's not really marketing, it's not really sales. So it basically had like no profession. So it was the weakest link. And as the company evolved and progressed, we noticed that we're actually paying a considerable price for the fact that it's not well managed. And then we got acquired and got to Oracle and saw basically the same problem at a much higher multitude. For example, I was in charge of some of the integration efforts of Ravella into Oracle. And then you realize that in order to introduce, for example, a SKU, to be able to sell your product as part of the Oracle backend machine, it's a process which takes around 4 to 5 months if you actually do it properly. And that's what basically opened us to the fact that as companies today rely on all of those business applications, and they configure and customize them to death, really. And they have large teams relying on those business applications, but what they're lacking on is tools and methodologies to actually do it properly. And that's where we took inspiration from everything that happened at IT over the last 15 years or so, where we took very manual ad hoc processes, if you look at IT like 15, 20 years ago, and completely transformed them as an industry with infrastructure as code and DevOps, etc. So Salto is basically the merging of these two problems and trends.
Yeah, definitely a space. Aaron, you and I loved Ravella when we talked to him. It's been a number of years. We were a little
just
bit
mentioned
sad.
it to somebody just the other day. As a matter of fact, it's actually funny.
We were a little sad it went to Oracle.
Well,
No comment on that.
Yeah, and Gil, kind of, I'll mention a few trends here, and then kind of get to the question as well. There's that trend you mentioned, of course. That is, hey, how do you get, through an acquisition, something into a larger portfolio, and especially something that is SaaS based into a company that is not SaaS based, because we are seeing that more and more with acquisitions of SaaS companies now. But if I step back even further and say why is this an issue, or why does this cause friction? It's because a lot of times more and more we're seeing customers using technology outside of central IT groups, right? And not just calling it like rogue IT or shadow IT anymore, but it's just becoming more and more just a job function, right? Especially in the SaaS space. And so, in these areas where SaaS is a critical business function, and it's more and more not just vanilla SaaS anymore, there's this kind of new concept developing, this business engineer, right? And somebody that can connect the dots at a SaaS level. And can you elaborate on that a little more and talk about that?
Yeah, definitely.
I saw your eyes roll. Getting really big there.
Yeah, it's a big topic. That's my day-to-day, right? So we're seeing today that companies, the number of business applications or SaaS applications that they're using is mind-blowing. You see hundreds of those in any modern companies. Now, in order for them to use those, they have to customize or configure, or in some cases develop to those business applications in order to make sure that the actual processes that are implemented in those business applications actually fit what the business needs. Now, in some cases, you will see those in a centralized IT, or in many organizations, we're seeing a business applications group. You've got your VP of business applications, which is a very new title, right? Just in the last few years or so. But as you mentioned, in many cases, some of these applications would be managed in the business unit. For example, if you look at customer support systems like Zendesk, for example, in most cases would be in a customer experience organization, etc. So you've got both your centralized and your decentralized parts of the problem. And the thing is that those systems are really mission critical, because if your support system is down, and let's say you're a B2C business, it has a huge impact over your business. If your Salesforce is down, then it means that you're not really getting leads assigned to salespersons, and your entire pipeline is suffering. If your marketing system is down, pretty much the same. It can actually go even worse, and you can mess up the way that you manage your campaigns. It can be very costly. So what we're seeing mission-critical systems which require a lot of customizations and configurations with teams which are growing, but because in many cases we're trying as an industry to make sure that a very non-technical person would manage those, everything is basically consumed via UI or very no-code, low-code way of things, which is amazing for actually developing a solution. But if you think of the entire SDLC, the software development lifecycle, the development is actually just basically the first step. And most of the work is being done later when you need to review the changes that you propose, to deploy, to monitor, to debug and understand what happened, etc. So all of these, which usually with software and modern infrastructure is handled using tools like Git with pull requests and CI/CD systems, etc., all of it is actually missing for all of those business critical systems. And many of the users involved in this today really are lacking the tools in order to implement processes which fit the criticality of the systems which they manage. And that's the gap that we're trying to solve, basically to allow these sides of the house, which are as critical as the product guys in many cases, to use the right processes and tools when they're doing the work.
Yeah. I'm curious, a lot of times, when us as consumers use a SaaS application, we just sort of get an account, we just start using it. We don't really think a lot about, how much to customize it, or, maybe there's an integration here or there, you link to Twitter or you link to, whatever. From a business perspective, as you get into the enterprise and you've worked with a lot of companies doing this, like how often are you making kind of customizations to SaaS applications? Is it kind of an ongoing thing? You're kind of care and feeding for it and tweaking it, and is the business kind of frequently making integrations into other systems, or is it kind of a one-time thing? What's the life cycle look like for SaaS maybe versus what you'd seen in the past for applications?
Yeah, sure. So I think that in practice, it's not that different from regular development and applications. I can share that, for example, that the thing that Salto does, and I know that you guys have talked a lot about Terraform and HashiCorp, so I think it's a nice analogy. So you can think of the core of what we're doing at Salto as a Terraform for business applications, which a lot of adaptations, which are very specific to what business applications actually need. So when we connect to a business application like Salesforce, I can share that the size of the configuration that we actually extract, we do code generation into Knuckle, which is a language very similar to HCL. So the size of the configuration is north of a gigabyte of text. And this is being managed in many cases behind a countless number of UI screens, which is mind-blowing. And we're seeing the same, not the same size, but also significant complexity with other business applications, such as NetSuite or Zendesk, or you might relate to Jira as developers, because if you think about Jira, then at larger organizations, we're also seeing considerable amount of customizations. Now, think, for example, on adding a custom field and some process in Jira. It's pretty common that once it's in, you can't take it out, basically, because God knows what's actually relying on it. So if you think of it, it's pretty much the same as tech debt, if we compare it to the way that we usually work on software systems. Now, if you look at each and every business application, then there's a big problem, even if you just limit the domain that we're looking at to a single business application. But the thing is that in many cases, many of these business applications are interconnected and integrated, because let's say you've got your quote to cash process, which starts in your, let's say, Salesforce with a CPQ, which is a quoting system, then goes out to NetSuite for finance, then it's connected to Zuara, for example, for billing, and eventually you actually need to collect with Stripe. So it's a process which spans multiple business applications. All of these are highly customized, and you've got very poor visibility into it. So the complexity here is staggering. It's basically as if you've just developed a large microservice application where you keep on like punching specific buttons, but it's very hard to actually understand what's the overall impact of it. Well, as developers, we're used to, well, you've got the code, you can change it, you can look at Git to understand what's the history. Someone can review a change. Hey, there are design patterns, there are packages. All of these goodies are missing when you're managing your organization's business applications. And it's unsustainable. By the way, similar to the way we provision servers around 15 years ago, before virtualization and the cloud really took off, was unsustainable. And at Salto, we believe that it has to change, it will change, and there is no need to really reinvent the wheel in the way that it needs to change. We just need to look up to DevOps and infrastructure as code, which basically already did the same for infrastructure.
Interesting. And Gil, what you mentioned, it kind of makes me laugh a little bit. It reminds me of the old days of like, DLL hell or some of these other things of, no matter how much things change, the dependencies always are the things that are going to get you, right? and it seems like almost even more so going forward. And so I'll ask this real quick then. So again, going back to this concept of the business engineer, mm-hmm. How much of that is being a really good coder, or how much of it is low code, no code? How much of it is more just being able to understand all of the dependencies you just mentioned?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think it has multiple parts to it, being a good business engineer. So the first part is actually understanding the domain, understanding what a business is trying to achieve when it is implementing those processes on those business applications. Now, some of the business engineers that we're working with are great developers. Most of them are not focused on that. They're experts in the different tools that you're using. So they're very good as no-code or low-code engineers. But more importantly, they're a very savvy process. They can easily handle complex processes and utilize, for example, tools like Git in order to track their changes. For example, building a change process where whenever you'd like to propose a change in your NetSuite instance, then you first do it in a sandbox, in a feature branch, then open a pull request. Only when it's get merged, deploy automatically to your UAT or production. It sounds trivial maybe to us as developers or infrastructure persons. It's science fiction for most of these business applications. So being able for a business engineer to actually understand these kind of processes and understand the value that they provide on the business application side is crucial. Also, understanding the dependencies, you can't really comprehend those in your head, right? Because the actual dependency graph is insane when you come to think of it, inside a single business application and across different business applications. So you need tooling for that. Now, in order for tooling to actually work, you need to be able to have some kind of standardized representation of what's actually being implemented. And the ability to actually express the configuration of those business applications, which again is core to what we're doing to Salto, it's also core to what a business engineer needs to do in the day-to-day, to understand and consume this kind of representation of the actual processes.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about, so I love the analogy you use that it's sort of similar to Terraform in that it took this thing that previously was, a lot of systems, disparate systems. You were trying to figure them out, but they had an API. It essentially created a structure around, how do you interact with them? How do you version control it? How do you keep track of it? How does Salto go about kind of bringing that Terraformness, if you will? I hate to use somebody else's thing, but the analogy, like what does Salto do? Kind of give us some examples of how you simplify the creation, the life cycle of these types of integrations, right? So how do you, in essence, how do you help reduce that technical debt that you talked about earlier?
Yeah, definitely. So Salto, at the core of what we have, is a language that we've created, which we call Knuckle, which stands for not another configuration language, and just happens to be the chemical sign of salt. So this language, which is a dialect of HCL, actually enables us to connect to the different business applications that we support, to crawl their existing configuration, and we basically do code generation. So we connect to Salesforce, NetSuite, Zendesk, Jira, etc. There are some more business applications. And then we do code generation of code in Knuckle, which represents the current implementation in those business applications. Now, from now on, everything is bidirectional. You can go and change the code in Knuckle and, for example, integrate with Git, create a proper change management flow with pull requests, etc., CI/CD. You can do a change in the actual business application, and the Salto verb for this is fetch, and just fetch the differences, and we highlight exactly what has changed. So we did it because, unlike with infrastructure where you need to assume immutability, and I think it's a good assumption. There are a lot of advantages for assuming immutability around the configuration of the infrastructure. With business applications, due to the level of the no and low code UIs out there, you can't really assume that. So you need to assume a different kind of process. Usually you start development in a sandbox using UI and no code, low code tools. Then you kickstart the actual process by transforming those changes that you did in the sandbox into declarative code, basically in Knuckle. And from here, these are all the usual processes that we know and love for the past, 60 years since the first source control system was developed. Now, some of the key advantages that this also allows us is to understand the dependencies between different applications, because if we read the configuration of, let's say, NetSuite and Salesforce, and we can see there is an integration enabled between them, and that a certain field in NetSuite refers to another field in Salesforce, we actually transform that into a reference, which is a language level construct in Salto. And then when you right-click that field in Salesforce and basically do a find all references, then you see that there is another process in NetSuite which refers to it. And if you'll change something on Salesforce, which actually broke that integration, you will actually have a missing reference warning on your code. So everything just became from runtime dependency into a compile time, interpreter time, a warning, which is something that many of our customers really love, because the issue of integrations between business applications, and by the way, also between a business application and a data warehouse or BI system, is a hairy one. It's a repeatable theme that we're hearing from customers.
And Gil, that's really, really good. And it helps a lot with painting that larger picture, because I definitely see the issue with that explanation. So thank you for that. One final question before we close out for the day. Salto is available as open source, as software, and as SaaS. So walk everyone through a little bit of why you decided to go in that model, first of all, and then second of all, which models which would be best for which use cases as well.
Yeah, definitely. So when we started the company, I think the first realization that we had was that it has to be an open source company. And the reason for that was because we're basically creating here a de facto standard for the industry to represent the configurations of business applications. Now, these days, in order for such standards to get adopted, they have to be open. The days of IBM and Oracle and Sun sitting in a room and deciding on industry standards are days of the past, and that's a good thing. So because we're creating here a de facto standard, it has to be open. Also, because the number of business applications that we need to eventually support is huge, is immense, we will need help from the vendors and from the community. And we think that an open source model is by far the best model which enables such collaboration. So that's why we started, and the core of the platform is all open sourced and is fully functional. It's not some kind of crippleware. It really is fully functional. And we're seeing our open source project being used, I think currently at 3 different use cases. The first one is actually, and it's not something that we planned for originally, it's with companies which build solutions on top of the open source engine. For example, if they need to build something on top of Salesforce, and where, for example, a SaaS provider is doing that, we have a very tight integration with Salesforce, so they actually use Salto in order to do this integration with their customers' Salesforce accounts. Another one is around vendors building adapters for Salto in order to enable their own customers to be able to use all that Salto goodness. And the last one is mostly around smaller, more technical companies. For example, in startups, they just use Salto in order to implement their business applications. So, for example, I think we have a case study of this. A cool startup basically saved tons of time by just implementing their Salesforce and HubSpot using Salto. Now, the commercial, which is our SaaS offering, is geared towards larger companies and enterprises, where they care more about collaboration, where they need a more easy-to-use UI, because you basically got your IDE in the browser with Salto. You don't need to install anything. You've got pre-integration with all the different Git providers. You've got all kinds of enterprise features like being able to monitor changes to the configuration, etc. So we're seeing a lot of traction for a SaaS offering with enterprises and larger companies.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic, Gil. We've kind of dug into a lot of different things. This has been it's been fun, especially like we mentioned. We always love to talk to founders who kind of lived with a problem and then started building technology that would have helped them out of their own problem and then commercialized it. And especially you guys having the background that you have, it's been really fun to dig into these things. What are some of the best ways if folks either want to get started with Salto or reach out to you and engage around some of these things? What are some of the good ways to get started, to get in touch with you?
Yeah, definitely. So first of all, over to our website at salto.io, we have a free tier, which is free for life. It's a read-only version of our SaaS, meaning you can connect it to all your different business applications and extract the configuration into Knuckle. And, for example, understand the dependencies or being able to search the configuration. So that's a great way to start. Another one is on GitHub. So it's salto-io on GitHub. There are instructions there for downloading or building or join our Slack community. All the instructions are there. And we always love great interaction with users and customers. These are still the early days, of the business engineering movement, and we need more and more folks to join us in this journey.
Nice. Very, very nice. Aaron, good stuff. Like we said at the beginning, we always love diving into more and more ways to sort of tackle SaaS, and whether it's just understanding who's using it or in this case, really digging into how to making it good for your business. You want to wrap us up and take us home?
Yeah, sure thing. And Gil, first of all, thank you very much. Very insightful. And also, by the way, yeah, I love the name Knuckle. So just have to say that real quick.
Me too.
So on behalf of Brian and myself, thank you everyone for listening. We appreciate the feedback. We appreciate the reviews. We appreciate you telling a friend as well. And just as a reminder, there is Cloudcast Basics that's out there. If you have a friend that is new to cloud computing and wants an introduction, there is our other podcast. We haven't done a season in a couple months. We kind of wrap that up for now. But if there's somebody that's new, certainly refer them to Cloudcast Basics. And again, thank you everyone for listening, and we'll talk to everyone next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.